The Rainbow Book Club project managers Port Harcourt World Book Capital 2014 invites you to the May 2025 edition of Talking Books Africa, our conversation with African authors or authors who have written about Africa. Join us on Saturday, 24th of May, 6 to 7 p.m. for an interview with Aiwanose Odafen. We will be discussing her book, Tomorrow I Become a Woman, a thoughtful, poignant novel that speaks to the strength and resilience of women navigating restrictive environments. Get a copy of this book, read it, and connect with us live on our social media platforms for the interview. Rainbow Book Club, spreading the joy of reading since 2005.
All right.
The Rainbow Book Club project managers Port Harcourt World Book Capital.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. You're welcome to another edition of Talking Books Africa. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's the May edition. Oh, wow. We're nearly halfway through the year already, and we've had consistently brought you interesting, incredible authors who are telling African stories from all over the world. Once again, welcome to Talking Books Africa, the Rainbow Book Club monthly virtual live conversation with authors that bring Africa's voice to the world through books. So please let us know where you're joining us from today. Would like to see you engage in the comments. Let's know your name and let's know where you are dialing in from. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for joining us on YouTube. Let's have you also engage in the comments. It will be great to hear and see where you're joining us from. Thank you once again. We have another exciting edition this month. We have a wonderful, beautiful, resplendent author in the house and also interviewer as well. So I will go straight into it and just introduce the Rainbow Book Club who powers the Talking Books Africa, this monthly live conversation. The Rainbow Book Club founded in 2005 and is the foremost promoter of reading in Nigeria. The Rainbow Book Club also project managers for the Port Harcourt World Book Capital 2014. Today, we're going to be listening to our guest author talk about her book, Tomorrow I Become a Woman. That's the name of the book. And it's loosely based on the stories of real women known to the author. The book, Tomorrow I Become a Woman, follows a complex relationship between mother and daughter as they grapple to come to terms with tremendous loss. This powerful debut by Aiwanose Odafen is a sensitive exploration of a woman's struggle to meet societal and cultural expectations within the confines of a difficult marriage, a tribute to female friendship, and also a love story that spans 2 decades and continents against the backdrop of political turmoil and a fast-changing world. Now, let's meet our guest author. Aiwanose was born in Lagos, Nigeria. As a high school student, she was a gold and silver medalist in the National Mathematics Olympiad competition. She graduated top of her class with a first-class degree in accounting and is certified with the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, United Kingdom. She holds an MBA from the Said Business School, University of Oxford. And prior to becoming a writer, Aiwanose worked as a consultant across industries, most recently in the public health sector with an international non-governmental organization helping to save lives. She has contributed to published non-fiction works and participated in Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Purple Hibiscus Trust Writing Workshop. She was longlisted for the 2020 Commonwealth Writers' Short Story Prize. Tomorrow I Become a Woman is her first novel. And then she is going to be, so you're welcome, Aiwanose. Thank you for joining us. But she's also going to interview today, and driving the conversation is the delectable Dabi Olu-Odugbemi, who's a lover of books and a budding writer. She's won prizes for both the Times Law Awards and the Slaughter. She also got the May Africa Essay Prize. Dabi came in the top 12% of poetry submissions to the Bridgeport Prize. On her Bookstagram, she discusses her love for literature, and as a private equity lawyer, Dabi advises high-profile clients on transactions. She's achieved a first-class law degree from Cambridge University and is passionate about helping others. During the pandemic, she and a university classmate wrote The Law Student's Guide, an ebook dedicated to demystifying studying law at university and providing guidance to students. In her role as a lawyer, she frequently takes on pro bono matters and was recently named on the pro bono recognition list of England and Wales by Lady Chief Justice of England and Wales, the Baroness Carr of Walton-on-the-Hill. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our interviewer for today, Dabi Olu-Odugbemi. Olu-Odugbemi, I beg your pardon.
Of course, thank you so much, Asarama.
It's good to see our guest author, Aiwanose Odafen. I know it's going to be an interesting and exhilarating conversation today, so I will be handing over to you as you steer this conversation forward.
Excellent. I have been so excited to speak to you, Aiwanose. Like, I can't even put it into words. I feel like I'm having a real fangirl moment, so I have to say that first of all. Tomorrow I Become a Woman, I have it here on Kindle. My background's blurred, so you can't see it. And I also have your second book, which is We Were Girls Once. I wish I turned off the blur. But honestly, just a fantastic book. I read it, I think, Tomorrow I Become a Woman when it first came out, kind of 2022. And as soon as I read it, I thought this should be required reading at schools. It is fantastic. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for also getting the second book as well. I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. So as Osarama alluded to, I have a whole slew of questions for you. I'm super excited to get into chatting about the book, but the book would not exist without the author. So I actually wanted to talk to you a bit about your background. And this question came up because I initially wrote the whole list of questions just around the book and your writing, but I was reading over your bio again and thinking, wait, no, she was a math Olympiad. She's a chartered accountant, very STEMmy, kind of academic and career background, and kind of left-brained, as people might say. So I guess, when and why did you decide that you wanted to be a writer, and how did you think about juggling that, coming from math, kind of STEM, to a more creative, right-brained way of thinking?
Yeah. So that's that. So really, when people meet me, they always think, oh, you're probably always a writer or something like that. No. But I think one thing I would say, I think I'll go all the way back to when I was a kid, because growing up, my parents didn't really believe in you're good at this or you're not good at this. So I loved math. But then I was really encouraged to read books, to write essays. My mom would go over my essays, read. And I loved books. I actually developed a real love for books. I would bug my dad all the time to get me books. And then I remember one time, I always say this, when I was 16, my dad actually told me, because I'd asked him again for another book. And then he actually told me, was why don't you write your own? Then I was I have nothing to say. It was such an innocent answer, because I really was I have nothing to say. And for me, that was my answer for years. I never thought I'd write a book. I just continued, because I love math, I love numbers, and I went into finance, that sort of thing. But then during my MBA, I actually met someone that was going through a very difficult situation. I think that year, I was I was in my MBA, all of that. And then I made a friend who was going through a very difficult marriage. And during that time, an aunt as well, another family member. So it was I was just being bombarded at the same, because, over as a Nigerian, you can't say you've not heard certain stories before.
Yeah.
Woman, right? Because we our parents and family tend to be very open about what's going on. But then at that, it was everything was happening at the same time at that particular point. And I just felt I was fed up with it. And I remember I called a friend to rant, because I just didn't understand. And like, because I was trying to give advice to this person, and everyone was telling me things like, what God has joined together and things like that. I think it was only like my mom that had a different opinion. And I called this friend who was young as well, and he was also saying something similar. And I remember I told him I was so frustrated. I was like, "You're young. Like, I understand you older people are telling me these things, and what about?" And then I told him, I'm like, "I'm going to write about this." And then I didn't even know I was going to write a novel. And then he was like, "Go and write," and we laughed. And then after my MBA, I moved back. I was like job hunting. I was like, "Oh, I have some time on my hands. Let me start." Initially, actually was like, I'm going to write this as nonfiction. But then I felt like I didn't want to take someone else's story or all these people's stories. I felt it wasn't my place, and I was like, I'm going to write a novel. I'd never written a novel before. I'd always just written nonfiction, but that was really how it started for me. So it's a very strange story, but yeah, that's actually the reality.
That's incredible. I mean, being inspired by your real life and then taking all of that and putting down something that's so, I mean, I imagine as an author, you read your own work so many times that it almost even loses the sentimentality and the feeling. But I can tell you as a reader, like, I don't know, maybe later I'll show you pictures, but I literally took like pictures of myself crying at the end of reading it, being like, everyone needs to read this book. Like, everyone needs to understand the experiences that people are going through. Um, and I definitely will get more into the characters and so on. But still along those lines of your background, you explained how, your parents kind of didn't force you into one direction or the other. I think, do you have any thoughts for people who right now are maybe sitting there thinking, no, I'm an engineer, or, I'm a scientist, or even, I'm a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, and want to pursue more creative routes? Like, what would your advice be to them about just juggling and managing that?
I'd say first of all, I think no one is limited. I think I always joke that if I can write a novel, anyone can, because I never ever saw myself writing a novel. When I started, like my very first draft was awful. I sent it to my friend who's the only person who's ever read that draft. And but then the good thing is I knew it was bad. And I thought there was something wrong with it, and I sent it to her because I knew there was something wrong with it. And I'd say if you want to be creative, start by engaging rather with art. Read. I knew it was bad because I read a lot, but I didn't know with it. But then she also, who's also a big reader, was like, "This is what's wrong," and I was like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 that's right." And I think, but especially if you want to write, you can't be a good writer if you're not a good reader, because when you kind of, oh, these are things that are possible. These are things that can be done with sentences. Sometimes you read a book and you're like, whoa, like I never even thought someone could write like that. It really opens up in a different way. And when you engage with good art, it actually really inspires you to also want to be that artistic, right? So I'd always
Yeah.
say, and start by engaging with art in different forms. It could be poetry, it could be books, it could be novels, it could be exhibitions, right? Some people love spoken word. I'm not the biggest spoken word person. I feel like reading poetry, but just
Yeah, I agree.
start by engaging, right? And I think that's the very first step, because once you get yourself in that space, once you start consuming all this art subconsciously, you actually get inspired to want to create your own, and then you kind of know, okay, what appeals to me, what would I want to do, right? And like for me, I love reading good poetry. I don't think I can ever write good poems, but when I read like really good stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so good. So I think that would definitely be my very, very first advice. Yes.
Okay. I mean, I won't be surprised if you pop out with a poetry book like in a year or two, honestly, because you say you can't write poetry, but you also said you couldn't write fiction, and then you wrote this, and we were girls once. So I don't believe you. But that actually leads me on really nicely, because this was going to be my last question. But since we're on the topic, I was going to ask, what authors and what works of fiction have kind of inspired you or continue to inspire you as a writer, as a human, as a woman, as a feminist?
Oh yeah, I think that's actually a really great question. When I actually started, right, so I always say that my feminist journey began like growing up. I didn't know I didn't know there was a word called feminism, right? Because I mean I was a kid, but I knew I was very like pro women. I certain things used to annoy me. I used to rant about them. Like I don't know if you schooled in Nigeria, but I used to participate in
I
all the
did.
boys versus girls.
Yeah, yeah, the debates.
Yeah, exactly. I was always like in front, but I remember reading as a 13-year-old. I remember reading Buchi Emecheta's Joys of Motherhood, and
Yes.
changed my life. It's not an
Yeah.
exaggeration when I say that book changed my life. Like I read that
Mm.
book and I was like, that is not going to be, that's not going to be me. Indigo
Yeah.
story. Like I was so annoyed. I think because I was also naive. I was 13. So I felt like, oh, as I kept reading, even as it kept getting worse, I was like, oh, the book is Joys of Motherhood. There'll be some happy ending at the end, you know.
Uh,
And I got to the end and I remember doing like this. I was like, this is the end. No,
you're
this
like,
cannot
where's the rest of it?
be the rest of it. Like, you know, and then everything that happened even after her, sorry to anybody that's not read Joys of Motherhood, I'm about to spoil it. But even after like her death, like what happened,
Yeah.
oh my, and I was so annoyed. But I'd say like,
Yeah.
um, so actually, the epigraph at the beginning of Tomorrow I Become a Woman is actually an ode to how I felt rather when I read Joys of Motherhood. So people always ask me
Mm.
like that quote at the beginning, the epigraph at the beginning of Tomorrow I Become a Woman. That's actually for me was me paying homage to her to that book. Because I
Mm.
don't think I would ever have written Tomorrow I Become a Woman if I didn't read Joys of Motherhood as a 13-year-old by Buchi Mecheta. Till her death, Buchi Mecheta said she was not a feminist, but not like you can't get more feminist than her works, you know. Um,
Yeah.
I also am definitely really inspired by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I remember when she published Purple Hibiscus as a
Yeah.
young, then my dad bought me a copy because, you know, it was like, see what this young, you know, woman is doing. And that really, I didn't even think I was going to be a writer then because how old was I, right? But
Mm.
I was like, whoa, and I really enjoyed I always say that I love Americana is my favorite work of hers. And when I feel lost in my writing, I will read Americana because there's a freedom and boldness in the writing that I really, really admire. And sometimes I'm like, I felt like she felt free to say what she wanted to say about certain things. And sometimes I
Mm.
feel as writers, we kind of tend to hold ourselves back. And when I want to be inspired to say what I want to say, I read Americana. So I'd say Chimamanda, of course, I went to her workshop. It was at her workshop. I had a draft of Tomorrow I Become a Woman then. That
Mm.
was great. It wasn't as bad as my first draft, but but it wasn't where I wanted it to be. And it was after her workshop. I remember she said something. She said, sometimes we get so caught up in our propaganda and what we want to say with our work that we forget to tell a story.
Mm.
And it
Mm.
was such a simple line, right? We forget to tell the story, but it changed my writing life forever. Like I went back after that workshop and I rewrote Tomorrow I Become a Woman in 3 weeks. Like after work,
Wow.
I'll drive to this cafe and I'll write till like what time in the night. And just like it completely changed my life. Um, that simple line. And so I always like talk about her being such an inspiration. And advice I give, don't forget to tell the story. Don't forget to tell the story. Like Akin became a romantic character. Like I totally wanted to tell a love story. Like there's so many things I didn't see that simple sentence.
Mm.
Then also I would say I don't know if you've heard of Brie Bennett, the author of The Vanishing Half.
I have, and I've read that. Yes, that was great.
The mothers. I really engage with her writing in such at such a
Mm.
deep level. Like when I'm like, oh, like I'm stuck with a sentence, I actually open The Vanishing Half to read. I
Wow.
hope so Americana and The Vanishing Half because I just as in I don't know I'm someone that I can be obsessive. I can read a book like 10 times as long as I've read you know as long as I enjoyed the book I can read it like so many times. So I always mention
Yeah.
I was like, if it's not Americana, it's the vanishing half of the mothers. There's just because there's just a way she writes. There's a rhythm in a sentence that sentences that really speak to me. I'd say,
Mm.
who else? Definitely Toni Morrison. You know, I mean, there's so many other great authors I can mention, but I'd say
Mhm.
that those are probably my top three. Like especially when I need inspiration.
Those are great ones, honestly. Definitely have enjoyed everything that you've mentioned and said. I have a copy of The Joys of Motherhood, and I too. That and Ogadinma, I don't know, but like those two very misleading titles because I'm like, where is the good at the end of this? It was not well, like, so yeah. I mean, along this path, and I really do need to get into the book, but I'm just really enjoying hearing about your writing process. I guess as an aspiring writer myself, but I'm also thinking about people who maybe don't want to be writers on this call, but are people who want to pursue something in life, some kind of whether creative endeavor or business or something. One thing that you've mentioned is the fact that your first draft was, awful to your standards, but there is a real perfectionism that we feel in society. I know myself, the amount of times I've started and stopped a story or a novel or something in my heart because I just feel like this is not good. So what is your advice about just kind of getting it down on the page, your idea, your business, whatever, just starting? Like, what would you say to people?
I can definitely speak from a writing perspective, and maybe because I've been in the startup world, I've lived 10 lives. So I can also maybe speak about business as well. I'd say, especially for writing, let me tell you, the perfect books that you see on the shelves that you read, they've gone through like so many rounds of editing. Like even when like I think one thing a lot of writers don't realize is that, like the business aspect of writing is so different. Like you have this like, oh my gosh, I think that's the book that's going to get published. Once you get an agent, your agent will edit it, like will give you another round of revisions. You get a book publisher or a book publishing deal. Your editor there is going to do another round, like you're going to read, like as I always tell people, write what you like, you're going to get. So you have to read read your book and still be able to smile because you will read it 100 times. Like since Tomorrow I Become a Woman got published, I haven't read the full book since because I've read it so many times that I was just like, I don't think I want to read this beginning to end again. Also, I'm such a perfectionist as well that I see so many things. I'm like, oh, that sentence should not be like that, because obviously as you grow, you become, but the thing is, I think a lot of people don't realize that your first work is never going to be your best work, right? But get it down, like get it out of you. Like some of the most talented people writers that that have like people that I've listened to, they always say, oh my gosh, my first draft was this, or my work was terrible, or I don't even know Carmen Machado. I'm really bad with names. So she's like a really celebrated author, but she kind of writes like it's a bit like it tilts towards horror, but it's feminine.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you're not into that kind of, but she always talks about how when you look at her writing program set, like she wasn't one of those that people thought would be successful because that's just like what she's doing. Like nobody ever saw her like she went after that. She went like she was working in like makeup. She was selling like makeup across counters and things like that because like no, but then she would like write something, send to someone, they would review, they'll come back. Like it was just like every writer that's out there will tell you that they didn't just become a great writer overnight. Like you have it's one of those professions, and as with most professions, you have to do it to get better. I realized that, do you know the funniest thing? When I was writing Tomorrow I Become a Woman, I'll tell you this. I wrote the first full draft, not the first one I sent to my friend, but the first complete draft that was like over 150,000 words. That was insane. I wrote it over
Wow.
a period of like 2.5 years, right? But the thing, as I got towards the end of the novel, because I write chronologically, some people don't, everybody's different, but I got towards the end of the novel, I realized how much my writing had changed since the beginning, and I had to go back and rewrite the beginning again.
Wow.
Was even not the final draft. That was even not close to the draft that got published because the draft that got published was rewritten and rewritten. So the thing is, you're always going to realize that don't get stuck on one sentence when you have like pages to write. You write a sentence, as long as just get it. I think I always say like your first draft is for getting the story out of you. Once you have the story out of you, you can reshape it, you can, you can edit, you can do so many things with it, but get that story on paper first because it's not going to be perfect. And I do one thing, I always give this random advice, and please take it or leave it. I have this thing I do, and I've been doing it since my very first book. I very bright, big red line on the page. And then once I've written something, I move the red line under what I've written. And I tell myself, don't read that red line. It's a mental thing as well. Like I'm like, okay. And when I open my draft again to continue writing, I generally like I read maybe a sentence or two above the red line to kind of, this is where I am.
Remember.
And then I continue. I don't read above my red line. I keep moving it. As I've written like a couple of pages, I move the red line because it's like, don't read above it. Don't read, just keep going, or else you're not going to get to the end. And that's literally how I got to the end of Tomorrow I Become a Woman. Because if I'd read from the beginning, oh my gosh, like
Yeah, that's fantastic advice because I feel like when I try to write, I every single time I open it, I will go back and reread it from the top to bottom again, and then I'm like, no, that doesn't sound right. No, I don't like that, and then I get frustrated, and I'm like, well, I'm not a writer. Like,
and then you close it. That's
exactly.
So that's why you need the red line. Even if it's not physical, it has to be mental. Like
Mm,
above, sometimes I read, maybe I started a chapter and I'm like, oh, what's the story? And then I read at from the beginning of that chapter. But I try not to read too far above my red line because it
yeah.
it just gets you in this hole, and then you
Mhm.
hit actually, and writers were most times, we're very sentimental, we're very emotional, we're so
Yeah.
connected to our work. It's like it's a part of you. And you're like, this is,
Mhm.
and then you close it, you feel bad about yourself. And I was like, no, I can't keep doing this.
I feel like a lot of people are taking the red line advice. I can see the chat, like, yeah, that's a good one for sure. Amazing. Okay, let's get into the book.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, and I know you said you've read it 100 times, but you haven't read it since it was published. But do you want to tell us in like very briefly what the book is about? We have the blurb obviously, and Osarama gave a little like indication, but I want to get into the characters and so on. So I wanted you to maybe give us just like a brief overview so that our audience also knows as we dive in.
Of course. So I want to make it clear. I've not read the book beginning to end, but I still go back to read the book.
Okay.
Sometimes you have to just encourage yourself, like, wait, you published this, you can write. Um,
You did. It's on my Kindle.
So, but Tomorrow I Become a Woman basically follows this young woman. She meets the perfect guy, or what looks or seems like the perfect guy. When she's about to graduate from university, she meets him at church. He's a singer, he's handsome, he's perfect, and this is
I'm
just
gonna jump in and say that Aiwanose describes him in the book, and I wrote this down because I knew I was gonna read it out today. You say he is good looking with chiseled cheekbones, perfectly symmetrical nose, and dark, loose, curly hair. And you also describe him as godlike. Wrote all of that down because I was like, I'm gonna say it.
exactly right. He's perfect, and she's like, oh, I'm going to marry him. And she does, right, even though she has lingering feelings for this other person that she's known since, literally this literally throughout her time in school. And then over the next, so we and this is just less than 10 years after the Civil War, so just before our 20-year era of the military starts, right? Military regime starts. And we follow her journey in this marriage, and in this difficult marriage, and her struggle against societal expectations and societal pressure to conform. And also the stories of her friends as well, and how these different women try to shape their own lives in this sort of tumultuous situation.
That's brilliant. That's such a great summary. I'm glad you did it because I was gonna try and then I was like, I'm gonna let it come straight from the author herself. So yes, as Awareness has said, we have our main character Uju. Her love interests are Gozie, who is our perfect chiseled Greek Adonis of a man, and then we have Akin, who is her lecturer. He is a Yoruba man who sees her, hears her, encourages her dreams. And then we have a lot of side characters, her best friends, her mother, who has very exacting expectations of a woman and what a woman should be, her uncle Ikena, who is her mother's brother, who kind of is like a ghost throughout the story. And I found Ikena a really interesting character as well because he doesn't exist and yet he takes up so much room. And I do have a question on that. But, so let's get into it. So my first question was your book, this one, but actually your books in general, I would say, the two that I have, focus a lot on girlhood. I think almost even more so than womanhood. And I was wondering why was that important to you to depict this unique time in a woman, every woman's life, girlhood.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, and that's true, right? Because even the title of my second book is Where Girls Want. Because I think for most women, that's where it all starts. That's where you start formulating your expectations and your vision of what you want life to be. But then that's also when society starts telling you who you should be. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like and we see this depicted in both books, right? We see with Uju from when she's young, her mother tells her, you're going to get married, or don't do this, don't do that. You have to, this is how a woman should behave. If she says it's about pain, oh, wait till you give birth. Those are the kind of things you hear. And people say, oh, women want certain things. But the thing is, like, one thing I always ask is, how do you differentiate what you want and what you've been told to want? If you've been want certain things from a certain age, of course you're going to want these things because you're told that
Yeah.
this is what you should want all your life. And then sometimes, and what happens is a lot of women actually find it very difficult to separate that, right? To say this is what I want and this is what society wants me to want, and then to actually to say, should I pursue my dreams or should I go with what society wants me to? And a lot of women actually sacrifice their dreams, their expectations, what they want, just to fit into the societal expectations. And one thing, and so that's why I really try to write about girlhood and about how it shapes us, because we see these little things that come together slowly, and they shape who we become and how we see the world, and so that's something I really I'm really passionate about. There's a time I used to be obsessed with the lottery of birth and things like that, and I just but yeah.
That's so interesting, but it's so true. The foundations of who we are are set at girlhood, at those young ages, and what you hear then influences so much of who you become.
Yes.
Fair enough. Okay. I mean, kind of relatedly, so throughout the book, there's this linking of being a woman, what it means to be a woman, to certain kind of canon events. So like you run throughout the book, there's points where something will happen to Uju, and then someone will say to her, you're a woman now, and it starts with, I believe, her first period. Then the day she gets married, you're a woman now. Then when her parents find out she's pregnant, I think her dad says to her, oh, you're a woman now. But then always you are a woman now, but constantly each life event is also you becoming a woman. When do you become a woman? And then she goes through, she has kids, but then she doesn't have any sons. So it's like, you were a woman when you had your period, you were a woman, but you're still not a woman. So like I wanted to ask, or just understand, like, when you have those threads running through, like, what were you trying to show there? Like, what were you trying to bring out with that?
Thank you. I really love that question, actually, because that's actually why I titled the book "Tomorrow I Become a Woman." It was kind of my frustration with just that moving goalpost. Oh,
Mm.
now you're a woman. Oh, and then the thing is, like, so many women chase this perfect definition of womanhood. Oh, I need to get married. Oh, then when you get married, it's like, oh, you've not had a child, and then women that are not able to have children for whatever reason feel like they're not complete, like they're not women, or oh, you've not had a son. You've had all these children, and then sometimes they even tell you, oh, one is not enough. What if something happens to that one?
Yeah.
And then it's like, at what point do we fall? And sometimes people even say, oh, when a woman dies, like, now she's a woman, she's going to, she's now a mother, she's taking care of her children in the afterlife and things like that. And so for me, I wanted to point out that moving goalpost and how a lot of women sacrifice themselves to actually attain something that's literally unattainable, because at every point in movie, society is going to say something is not right. Oh, your voice is too loud. Oh, but then when you're quiet, oh, you're too quiet, you're too timid, you cannot achieve anything like this. That there's always something that's wrong, and at what point do we separate ourselves from that? And I think we all fall into this. Like me myself, sometimes I get caught up and I have to step back and be like, do I want this, or is it because I'm told to want this? Should I care that I'm turning a certain age? Should I care that am I caring about this because I want to care or because I've been told to care? And is that
Yeah.
and so a lot of questions that are in the book are actually questions I've also grappled with myself. And I really wanted to put that on the page. I just saw a comment that popped up that said, my life isn't ladylike at all. And I was told, oh my gosh, growing up, I was told so many times about how my laughter is this and that, how I wasn't ladylike enough. And at some point I just had to be like, oh, that's how I laugh. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be like, ha ha ha,
Yeah.
So
And I think there is a bit in the book as well about that. One of Uju's daughters, I think, gets told that her laugh or the way she speaks or something is not ladylike. So every single thing is nitpicked. It's I mean, yeah.
we're
I
constantly
did
go
yeah.
ahead. I
I
just
was just gonna say I didn't even register the point that you made about the title of the book, but it's true. Tomorrow, it's always in the future.
exactly.
That's incredible.
It's always in the future. You're never going to be a perfect woman enough for society now, so I mean, at what point do we just go, do you know, well, maybe I don't want to be a woman.
In society terms, like I'm woman enough for me. That's good enough. This is how God made me, and I'm happy. No, that's fair. Okay, so we're gonna get into discussing the men a little bit. Our two kind of male characters who we've mentioned briefly, Akin and Gozier. So there's a lot happening, obviously, for Uju. There's a subplot of romance between Akin, who I feel like when reading the book, maybe this is growing up on kind of romance novels, but it's also the guy who hears you and listens to you and all those flowery things. That's the soulmate. But then, we have the reality of the fact that Gosier is the man who, in societal terms, in realistic terms, is the person that you would be told you should end up with this person and so on. So there's those aspects. But then I was also really fascinated by the fact that you also had them be from different tribes. And obviously that comes from a lot of the commentary around the time period that the book is set in, post-Civil War, Nigeria kind of slowly trying to recover, bring those relationships back together. So, but I wanted to ask why you kind of decided to have the two main characters be different tribes, because we could easily have had them both be Igbo, but then also discuss the Civil War in the background. So why did you also bring that into the foreground with this relationship?
Yeah, so kind of, and yeah, and again, that's a good question. I keep saying that because it is, because so, the main factor actually is the fact that the book is set post Civil War, and I really wanted, one thing I really tried to do is, a lot of people, some people tell me that my writing is too political, which is fine, but I think it's impossible to separate humans from the politics around them. It's so impossible. Like, even the kind of
Yeah.
conversations now is because of things that are happening right now politically, right?
Mhm.
If you ask your parents about the 90s, there's no way they're not going to talk about certain things that were happening with the government and things like that. And so I really try to always capture the mood of whatever time period I'm writing in. I think one thing I really wanted to talk about was that tension, that, as in, we've always had tribal tensions in Nigeria, right? Thanks to the colonialists, right? But but the thing is,
Yeah.
I capture that post-Civil War distrust. Like, we
Mhm.
didn't, that slowly evolved over time into what it is now, right? But there was just
Mhm.
that we don't trust these people. Why we
Mhm.
don't, like, it should not, like, as an Igbo, and then you have to also remember that Uju's mother, has lost her brother in this war.
Yeah.
And so that, even though Uju never categorically says it, that's definitely a factor. Like, you
Yeah.
have to think about it. And so that's actually the main reason. Like, okay, what if the person that might be perfect for you doesn't look like that? Don't know, doesn't fit into that box of what should be perfect. And then there's
Mhm.
this other person that looks like the perfect thing but isn't perfect. And so
Yeah.
I really wanted to capture that, tension, and to also capture the mood of the country at that particular point in time. I think that was very important for me.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, even outside of the kind of main characters, I literally had a note here, and I kind of tabbed it in the book, where you also have this really funny story about her two neighbors. I think Mama Bidemi and then Mama Ifoma. So for context, Mama Ifoma, I think someone who sells food to her or something has a baby, and she's going there and she wants to go and say something in Yoruba to like be like, congratulations on the birth of your baby. So she asks Mama Bidemi, okay, what should I say? What's like a good greeting? And Mama Bidemi gives her this rant that basically translates to something like, you, your dad, your mom, everybody, like, screw you, you guys are dumb. Like, and and then when Mama Bidemi is asked why she does that, she says, well, she expects Mama Ifoma to at least recognize the word Olushi after living in Lagos for years. I thought that was so interesting. Like, why that as well? Was it also to add more like cultural context and some humor, I guess, to the situation, or why those little bits?
There were so multiple reasons. So actually, that story is a very true story, but not in the same context. So
Mm.
my grandmother used to work as a nurse in Lagos. So my grandmother, just for context, my grandmom is from a very, like, her dad was Sierra Leone, but her mom
Okay.
from Bayelsa, and then she basically lived in Lagos for a huge part of her life. And so my grandmom speaks fluent Yoruba. She married a Yoruba man. That's on my mom's
Mhm.
side. But anyways, the point is, and then she works at this hospital, and two nurses, right, who are from, no, this is post-Civil War Nigeria. Two nurses are fighting, right? And then it's like,
Mhm.
what happened? And basically the Yoruba nurse, the a patient of the Igbo nurse had given birth, and then she asked the Yoruba nurse, what should I go and say? And that was literally what
Oh no.
I just thought it captured the mood of the country at that particular point in time so well, so
Mhm.
well. I'm like, oh, I have to put this in my novel.
Mhm.
It was just like, and so I really wanted to capture that, like, oh, how would this one have, a Yoruba friend or something like that, the way she talks, and
Yeah.
meanwhile they are both living in the same compound and they are also friends, and they will still
They're
say,
also good friends.
also eat good food, and they'll still settle and gist and eat corn, and it's so and that's how a lot of it was and still is. Like your neighbor people will fight, this your body. But in the end, they'll be like, I bought corn, do you want to eat? And people will sit down and eat. So I really just
Yeah.
wanted to mention that how, humans we're so funny. We're so funny. We allow
Mm,
these things divide us, we allow these things define us, right? But at,
mm,
at our very core, right, if you actually like for most people, for most reasonable people, they don't hate their neighbors, right?
yeah.
And so I wanted to infuse a bit of humor in that, but I also wanted to just capture how strange it is that we allow tribe and all these things define us and to separate us and to make us hate each other. And then
Mm.
when at the end of the day, we're just neighbors who are really striving for the same things in life. Yeah.
Indeed. I think when things like that happen, wars and so on, you start to look at people as almost like an entity instead of the individuals. And so it's like in the backdrop of, the Civil War and all the violence and hurts that different sides have caused to each other. But then at the end of the day, each side is made up of individual people who you share corn with and who you have a laugh with. And it's trying to remember that in those really difficult times. Makes sense. So I did say that I wanted to talk about Uncle Ikena. So this ghost who runs through the book, who is this also championed almost as an ideal man. And I think I'm going to come on to more things about the men in the book, but I found it really interesting that yes, it's a book about women, but the men in the book are also very central. And Uncle Ikena is a really good example of that. So can you talk a bit more about his character? What led you to include him? Why you have him as such a strong presence in the book, even though throughout the entirety of the book, he is literally not alive. Like he is a ghost, pretty much.
I really wanted to. Ikena is such an interesting character because the person that actually inspired Ikena's character is actually a woman. So a friend of
Mm.
Yes, so a friend of mine, her grandmother actually disappeared during the Civil War. She walked out and she completely disappeared. She was never heard from again, nothing. Until this day, they don't know what happened to her. And I remember then I was still writing my novel and we were having a chat and she mentioned this about the Civil War and I felt like, oh my gosh, and I think there's something that comes with loss when there's no closure.
Mm.
Person is a ghost because there's for family members there's no closure, there's no, oh, this is a grave you can go to drop a to drop a bunch of flowers
Yeah.
or stem of rose or something and to be like, oh, or to pour libation and say mama rest well or something like
Mm.
that. I think for me, and so that was actually the person that inspired Ikena's character. But then as I started writing, Ikena's character became more than that. He became kind of because Uju is this person that grows up in a certain way. And I really
Mm.
wanted to have a character that was the only person that really pushed for her to be who she really is. And
Yeah.
and it's like a ghost, like you mentioned, because the main reason she ends up with Gozie is because she sees Ikena in Gozie. She goes through life looking for that perfection, that man that is just great. And a lot of not all women, of course, but a lot of women will tell you, oh, like some people when tell you, oh, my dad is so great. I'm looking for, like, I really like a man
Yeah.
like my uncle. Or there's just someone that we look at as idealistic.
Mm.
Like this is like an ideal rather.
Mm.
And and sometimes we go through like looking for, but then we don't really like, and you can see in the book, we don't really get a full picture of who Ikena is. We only see him through people's memories. We see how his sister remembers him. We see how his niece remember him. We even see how Uju's dad remembers him, but we don't really know him because
Mm.
that's what really happens when people pass away. We
Mm.
kind of just remember them through different fragments, right? And we kind of use that to piece together a picture. And I really wanted that, but I also really wanted to write about the impact that the Civil War had on people. I've heard people
Mm.
talk about the Civil War. I've read about the Civil War. I read papers about the Civil War. I watched videos, and I
Mm.
just get this haunting feeling that's always with me once I'm done. There's a way people speak about the war that is just really haunting, and speak about people that were lost during the war, and you can tell that these people sometimes still see these people every day in their minds. They still think
Yeah.
about these people, and so Ikena was also a vessel for me to write about that.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. I also wanted to give our audience a quick warning. If you wanted to ask any questions, because I will keep going. I still have a list, but just if anyone has any questions that they want to pop in the chat for me to ask, please do let me know. So it's actually really funny that you just ended off your sentence on you read papers and books, because my next question was actually going to be, how did you go about researching the time period of the book? You write about it like you were standing there in the middle of everything happening, which is incredible. So like, what was that process like? What did you do? Like, what kind of resources did you use?
I read a lot. Like a lot. Like I did so much research. At a point, I had to be like, stop researching. Like you're I had to actually tell myself, stop researching, because
Yeah.
one thing we writers do is like to procrastinate. And we look for things. Oh, I'm just researching. And you're just there, 3 months from where you're researching, you're not researching, you've gotten
Yeah.
information.
You're procrastinating. Yeah.
I literally had to just tell myself, stop researching. But I read like I actually I didn't read full books, I'll be honest about that. And I tried to get as much as soon as I felt like I'd gotten what I needed from a book or from an academic paper, I stopped. I also read a lot of first person accounts, because I
Oh,
find
wow.
it's very different when you're reading like history, like, oh, so and so person did this, some person, one person shot this person, one person organized. That's very different from someone telling you, I was selling soap with my mother in the market when the first bomb hit. That's very different. It completely changes how you view the war. And I really
Yeah.
wanted that. And I read a lot of first person accounts like that. I watched videos, like I literally watched videos of people like just narrating. Like one person talked about how his cousin drove them into the forest. Like he never learned he didn't know how to drive. He literally just, the soldiers were coming, literally just entered the car, and like they just went into the forest. They had no,
Oh.
and his cousin was like maybe 15, 16. He was like 12, his brother, like they were just, because they're just trying to escape. So I listened to those because I wanted to feel the humanity behind it, because it's very different. Like I said, when you're reading statistics or reading, academic papers, that's very different from someone telling you what they were doing, because then you see that period as, okay, these are real people. These were real events. And also even post the Civil War, like the 1980s, 1970s, I listened to a lot of music from that time, because I always say that music is a very good way, and you see in my novel, music is a very good way to transport people in time. I always say that you can ask me what was I doing in, say, 2001. I might not remember, but if you play Craig David's CD when Born to Do It, I will tell you how I was in my uncle's place. And my uncle, I was a bachelor. My mom dropped me and my sisters there because she had to do something, and she wanted, and he played, and he brought out the CD and played it. And that's when I finally had a crush on Craig David. So a very great way to transport people in time, and that's a tool I always use, because like music is, I listen to a lot of music from that time. I also try to read news clippings from that time. I try to look for news clippings. I also try to, because there's some available digitally as well. I try to, what was happening in the news, what was the politics, what do people care about, what was the economy like, were things expensive, things, those little things that kind of build a fuller picture beyond statistics, and so that's what I try to do.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to talk about Gosier actually. So he's meant to be the villain in the story in many ways. I think he is the oppressor in Uju's life. He abuses her financially, emotionally, mentally, like every single way. And I think you kind of show us that he is meant to be a toxic kind of character, but at the same time, I found the writing really interesting. And this was on my second read of the book, actually, that you also in many ways try to show us that he's not an inherently evil character. The first time I read it, I think I walked away thinking, just an awful man, like God, like, but then it's like, then you read it the second time and you're like, well, actually, he starts out life very pure and innocent in himself as well. He is a journalist writing about, the crimes that are being done to people, and he's trying to be very outspoken, but then he gets thrown into Kirikiri and has a really haunting experience there. And, that influences him. He ends up having a lot of anger issues in the book, but I can imagine being in Kirikiri for that long, like who wouldn't come out with some kind of PTSD or something. So I guess what were you trying to comment on with the character of Gosier generally, and what message would you want, like especially male readers, to I think take away from the character that you portrayed?
Yeah. So I think with Gosier, right? I really try to show how sometimes set people like yes, I think we all have a propensity for evil. No matter how good you are, something can just happen like this, and it can, like he was never a perfect character, but we see the change that happens post prison. We see how literally completely changes him and makes him such a violent and such as it's almost lacking a conscience, right? And how he's almost idealistic about the government and what the government should be doing and all of that, and then he goes to prison and it's like, wow, like why am I doing all this, and so when his friend approaches him, and so I try to I think what I was trying to show because his character is kind of that slippery slope, and how sometimes, right, um even seemingly imperfect people, we all have a story. They also have stories, right? And people don't just become who they are overnight. Something usually happens, different events happen that these people let shape them into who they are. And that was something that was very important to me, to make Kozi somewhat human. And to let people see that sometimes, we're just really a product of, circumstances and events. Does it justify his actions or thing? No, right? But we also need to keep that, in mind, right?
Yeah.
So for men, I think it's also just really being conscious and being careful. To answer the second half of your question, being conscious and careful. Am I becoming what I hate, or am I becoming what I've spoken against? Am I like, actually consciously catching yourself when you do or say things that you should be naturally against, or you're even naturally just not like that, but then slowly it's a slippery slope. And most people are not self-conscious enough, or self-aware rather enough to catch themselves as they slowly fall down that slope. And it's something that I really wanted male characters to be male readers rather to be aware of, as they read this character that's so defining and has such a huge presence in the book, right? Like people message me like, I hate him, and why did you need to kill him at the end? And I'm sorry for those who've not read the book.
Yeah.
you know yeah.
No, that makes sense. I think one, understanding people in the context of what they are, but two, as you say, being aware of that slippery slope, and that's for everyone. Yeah. I was gonna take a couple of questions from our audience, and then I have a little game for us to wrap up with Aiwanose, so I'll do that at the end. But Tarari has asked, at what point do you think you'll feel validated as a writer? Going back to read Tomorrow I Become a Woman, because you need to encourage yourself in, and that's regarding, sorry, going back to reread, Tomorrow I Become a Woman, just to encourage yourself in the fact that you can write and that you have published something.
Wow, that's it. To be very honest with you, right? I mean, of course, like everyone wants like crazy success and stuff like that. So definitely, I would like the sort of like $1 million, like million copies rather, like
Manifesting it for you.
that's exactly right. Like I think everyone. There's almost no writer, even the most self-righteous would tell you, oh yeah, like very few writers would be like, no, I don't want success. There are a couple of strange ones that would tell you I don't want success. But I think most writers will tell you they want success. But I think also most writers will tell you that even the successful ones will tell you that you never really feel, oh my God, I can write. Because that's just kind of that's kind of the curse of you always feel there's that self-doubt will always remain, to be honest. Like, even now that I have 2 books out, like sometimes I get so stuck in my own head, like I don't write for a while, and then sometimes I just like pick up my own book and I'll just read, and oh, this was actually a nice sentence. What was I thinking when I wrote that? Like, oh wait, actually right. And to be honest, like most writers, I met a writer like last year who her first book was like so huge. It was on like Oprah's book list and all of that. And
Wow.
it 10 years to write her second book just because of how successful her first book. You think, oh my gosh, she was so successful. Yeah, she'd be like, oh, let me write that. And she said just because of how successful her first one was, it became a case of, wow, can I write that? Can I write it? can I, and so for long, the noise, everything, and her second book just came out last year, and her first book came out 2014. So
Wow.
10 years. I think it was 2013, 2014, but yeah, 10 years. Took her 10 years to get her second book out there. So I think almost no writer, to be quite honest, will tell you that you ever reach a point where you're like, oh, and to be quite honest, and I think that's also good because it keeps you humble. It keeps you're always reading. Like I'm always like, when I hear about like a good author or a good, like I'm like, I'm like, because to be quite honest, no one is perfect. No one, yeah. Nobel Prize winners will tell you that, they're always eager to improve. If any writer ever tells you, oh, I'm perfect right now, then you should probably not pick up their work. It's very terrible.
Fair enough. Okay. And Mrs. K has asked, first of all, if you were to base your writing on another historical period, what would it be? And the second question is a more, I think, deep philosophical question, but she's asked, do you feel you have become a woman?
Oh, wow. Very serious question. Pressure. I'll answer your first. In terms of historical period, I'll definitely say to be quite honest, like I have this idea for a book because I have like I've told you about my grandmom's
Yeah.
ancestry, but like actually have this book I probably shouldn't give away too much, but maybe at some point
Give it away. Tell me.
but I'll definitely love to write about post-slavery West Africa. After the slave trade ended, and the people that came back, I would love to write about that period, especially those that settled in like Sierra Leone and in Liberia, and there's a complexity in that history that that I want to write about, partly mostly because of my heritage and like my grandmother and things like that, and her family. But yeah, that's definitely something that's always interested me. I've not been able to pursue it as much as I want to, but I keep reading and asking questions, and it's like but sometime in future, maybe like 5-10 years from now, you hear that the book is out, and then you'll be like, oh, she mentioned this or one random 2024.
Yes. We were the first to know.
Exactly. So now your second question, do I think I've become a woman? Oh, that's a very tough one. To be quite honest, then, so a part of me is like, oh, I'm going to be a girl forever because I want to be, I always want to maintain the whole I'm young thing in my, like I always want to be young in my mind. Like when people tell me, when someone calls me auntie, I'm like, who's your auntie? I'm not auntie. you know but I think I'm slowly getting to a point where I'm not allowing society's definition of womanhood to define who I am, right? I'm not going to give myself a timeline for certain things. I'm not going to, I'm going to try to live life more on my terms and not what is expected of me. And I've slowly over the years pushed back against things that people are like, oh, you should be doing this or you should do that, or you should not make this move because if you do this, you'll never get married and things like that. Like, I mean, why should I be auditioning for some,
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense to spend your life that way. So I think I'm slowly detaching from that. Of course, I still like people ask me because people hear me talk about these things or they read my book, and I'm not the perfect feminist. Like I catch myself all the time saying certain things or thinking a certain way or dividing myself for certain things I should be dividing myself for, right? So I think there's no that I so but to answer your question, I think I'm slowly getting to that point where I'm very comfortable in who I am as a person and as a woman. Yes.
Love that. We love to hear it.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay. The last thing on my list before I hand back over to Osarame is I usually play a this or that game with guests. So I'll just tell you two things and then you pick one, and you can't think about it too much. You just have to go. So this or that, books or TV?
Books.
Hot drinks or cold drinks?
Hot.
Monopoly or Scrabble?
I didn't get that.
Monopoly or Scrabble?
Monopoly, I know.
Competitive.
I'm very competitive.
Going out or staying in?
I'm a writer, come on.
True. Fiction or non-fiction?
Non-fiction. I struggle with non-fiction.
That's fair. Sweet or savory?
Savory. Savory. I don't really have a sweet tooth. Yeah.
Okay. Early bird or night owl?
Night owl. You hate me in the morning.
Fair enough. Rich and famous or rich and unknown?
Oh, rich and unknown. I can't imagine how like celebrities live, like constantly a camera in your face. I don't know.
I agree. I'm the same. Breakfast or dinner?
Dinner. I'm not much of a breakfast person, to be honest. Yeah.
I like breakfast foods like at dinner though.
Yes. I those all day breakfast places are the best. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. And then my last one is beach or city break.
Well, that's a tough one. I think it depends. But probably beach. Beach. I just love the feel of the sea breeze. Yeah.
Sun, it's great.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Aiwanose, for speaking with me. I had the best time talking to you. Honestly, I could do this for hours. Thank you so much for bringing these beautiful books into the world and just for imparting so much knowledge in what you've written. I am so excited to pick up whatever you write next. You are an auto buy for me, and just know that like if you have one stand left, it's me. Like I love everything you put out. So massive congratulations and thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for speaking with me. I've enjoyed our session and our conversation. Yeah, I definitely would love to connect after. So thank you.
I will. You will see a DM from me shortly. And I'm gonna hand back over to Osarama just to tell everyone what's coming up with the Rainbow Book Club next and what people can look forward to before we close out.
All right. Thank you so much, Dabi, for that. And thank you, Aiwanose, for that very, very exhilarating conversation. I totally enjoyed a lot of the principles you talked about. And now it's clearer to me, Tomorrow I Become a Woman, and how you came about that topic. And I particularly enjoyed the part you said, live life on your terms, not bow into the pressure the society sets. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, Dabi, as always, for very thought-provoking questions. So thank you. And thank you to our audience. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions, who's engaged in the comments. We have an equally exciting interview next month, and we're going to be hearing from Dr. Ebele Jonathan on My Transition Hours, the former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, speaking about his book, My Transition Hours. So do well to join us next month on the 28th, Saturday, the 28th of June at same time, 6 p.m. West African time. And we will have that conversation with him. Feel free to also follow us. And if you want to go back to watch this edition of Talking Books Africa, you could go to YouTube at Rainbow Book Club Official on YouTube, and on Facebook, it's Rainbow Book Club. And then there's the Port Harcourt World Book Capital 2014 and Port Harcourt Book Festival on Facebook. Those are the handles on Facebook. And then on Instagram is at Rainbow Book Club Official. And then on Twitter, X, it's a Rainbow Book Club. Rainbow Book Club on X is the BK. So it's not the full spelling of book, it's Rainbow BK Club on X. Thank you so much for joining us today on the May edition of Talking Books Africa. Special thanks to our guest author, Aiwanose Odafen, speaking about her book, Tomorrow I Become a Woman. And thank you to our interviewer, Dabi Olu-Odugbemi. And thank you to everyone who's joined in from across the world. Keep a date with us next month, 28th of June, Saturday, 6 p.m. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening or afternoon, depending on where you joined from. Take care and bye-bye.